Hello my dear wanderers, it's time to gather close once more. Welcome back to our sanctuary where the modern world fades into shadow and the ancient stories of Ireland rise like mist from forgotten graves. Tonight, we walk a darker path than usual. We leave behind the sunlit halls of heroes and the gentle magic of the fair folk to venture onto desolate roads where the clatter of hooves echoes through the darkness. Tonight, we speak of the Dullahan, Ireland's most terrifying herald of death. Picture yourself standing on a narrow country lane in the heart of rural Ireland. The sun has long since abandoned the sky, leaving only the pale light of a crescent moon to illuminate your way. The hedgerows on either side of the road loom tall and impenetrable, their thorny branches reaching toward one another overhead like gnarled fingers grasping in the dark. The air is thick with the scent of earth and decay, that peculiar smell of autumn when the world begins its slow descent into winter's embrace. You are utterly, completely alone, or so you believe. Then you hear it. At first, it is barely perceptible, a distant rumbling that might be mistaken for thunder rolling across the hills. But there are no clouds this evening, only that thin sliver of moon and the countless stars scattered across the velvet black. The sound grows louder, more distinct. Hoofbeats. Heavy, rhythmic, relentless. They pound against the earth with such force that you feel the vibrations rising through your feet, traveling up your legs, settling like ice in the pit of your stomach. Every instinct screams at you to run, to hide, to close your eyes and pray that whatever approaches will pass you by. But you are frozen, rooted to the spot as surely as the ancient oaks that line these roads. The hoofbeats draw closer. Now you hear other sounds mingling with them. The creak of leather, the jangling of harness, perhaps the whisper of a cloak snapping in the wind. Your breath comes in short, panicked gasps. Your heart hammers so loudly you wonder if the approaching rider can hear it. And then, from around the bend in the road, he appears. The Dullahan, the dark man, the harbinger of death. In the folklore of Ireland, there exists no figure more absolutely terrifying than this headless rider. While the banshee wails her warning and the puka plays his tricks, the Dullahan brings something far more final, far more terrible. He is death made manifest, doom incarnate, the physical embodiment of that which we all fear most, the inevitable end that comes for every living soul. His appearance on these lonely roads is not a warning to be heeded or a curse to be broken. It is a pronouncement. It is judgment. It is the end of all things. But who is this fearsome figure? Where does his legend originate? How did he come to haunt the collective imagination of an entire nation? To understand the Dullahan, we must journey deep into Ireland's past, into times when the old gods still demanded tribute and the line between life and death was drawn in blood. We must explore not just the legend itself, but the very real terror it inspired in generations of Irish people who would lock their doors, draw their curtains, and huddle together by the fire whenever they heard hoofbeats in the night. Tonight, I invite you to delve with me into this darkest corner of Celtic mythology. We will examine every aspect of the Dullahan, his appearance, his powers, his origins, and his purpose. We will hear the accounts of those who claim to have seen him riding through the darkness. We will learn why he exists at all, and what ancient god might have donned this gruesome form. We will discover the one curious weakness that might, just might, offer protection against his terrible power. So settle yourself comfortably. Lock your doors. Draw your curtains tight. And whatever you do, if you hear hoofbeats tonight, do not look out your window. Do not open your door. For the Dullahan rides tonight, and he may be calling your name. The name that speaks of darkness. Before we can truly understand the Dullahan, we must first understand his name. For in Irish folklore, names carry tremendous power and meaning. They are not arbitrary labels but descriptions that reveal the very essence of a being. The name Dullahan, or more properly Dublachan or Dullahan in the original Irish, is no exception. It is a name that whispers of shadows and speaks of something profoundly unsettling. The most commonly accepted translation of Dullahan is Dark Man or Dark One. This interpretation draws from the Irish word dubh, which means black or dark. It is the same word we find in other Irish terms, Dublin, meaning black pool, which gave Dublin its name, or Crom Dubh, the dark god we will discuss later. But this darkness is not merely the absence of light. In Irish tradition, darkness often carries connotations of the unknown, the dangerous, the otherworldly. It is the darkness of the grave, of the deep forest at midnight, of those liminal spaces where the mortal world brushes against something far older and far more terrible. The lexicographer Edward O'Reilly, working in the early 19th century, offered additional etymological insights. According to O'Reilly, the term could also derive from dur or dur, meaning anger, or from durric, meaning malicious or fierce. Under this interpretation, Dullahan becomes not just dark man, but angry one or malicious being. Thomas Crofton Croker, who documented many of the earliest written accounts of the Dullahan in his seminal work Fairy Legends and Traditions of the South of Ireland, found this alternative etymology somewhat questionable. He preferred the straightforward dubh interpretation, particularly given that virtually every description of the Dullahan emphasizes his connection to blackness, his black clothes, his black horse, his black coach. But there is another name by which the Dullahan is known, one that is perhaps even more direct and chilling, Gan Sheen. In Irish, this translates simply to without a head. No ambiguity here, no room for interpretation. The name states baldly what the Dullahan is, a headless entity, a being that has been severed from the very seat of thought and identity. Some scholars have argued that Gan Sheen and Dullahan are actually separate entities that have been conflated over time, merged into a single figure by folklorists and storytellers. Whether this is true or not, the name Gan Sheen has become inextricably linked with the Headless Horseman of Irish legend. Regional variations of the name also exist throughout Ireland. In some areas, particularly in the south, he might be called Dullahan or Dullahan. These variations likely reflect the organic evolution of oral tradition, the way stories and names shift subtly as they pass from one generation to the next, from one village to another. Each pronunciation carries the weight of countless tellings, of winter evenings when grandmothers would lower their voices to speak of the headless rider, of warnings given to children who strayed too far from home after dark. The name Dullahan also appears in older Irish texts with slightly different meanings. In some medieval sources, Dullahan serves as a more general term for a type of goblin or malicious fairy, not necessarily headless at all. The earliest reference to a creature called a Dullahan appears in Charles Valence's 1802 work on comparative linguistics, where he describes it as a terrible bugbear that peasants heard dragging a heavy chain through the villages and along the roads. Notably, this early description makes no mention whatsoever of the creature being headless. This has led some researchers to question whether the Dullahan was originally part of Ireland's oral tradition at all, or whether he might be a relatively recent addition to the pantheon of Irish supernatural beings. Yet the name persists. It echoes through Irish folklore like a dark incantation, spoken in hushed tones by those who believe and by those who want to believe. Mothers use it to frighten wayward children. Be home before dark, or the Dullahan will get you. The elderly speak it with genuine unease, remembering stories their own grandparents told with utter conviction. The name has become synonymous with a particular kind of dread, the fear of meeting something on a lonely road that has no business existing in the rational world. And what does the name ultimately tell us? That the Dullahan is darkness personified. That he is anger and malice given form. That he is, quite literally, without a head and all that implies, without mercy, without reason, without anything human that might be appealed to or bargained with. He is the dark man who rides the dark roads under dark skies, and his name alone is enough to make even the bravest soul shudder. A vision of horror, the Dullahan's appearance. If you were unfortunate enough to encounter the Dullahan on one of his nightly rides, what exactly would you see? The accounts vary in their details, filtered as they are through the terror of witnesses and the embellishments of storytelling, but certain core elements remain consistent across virtually all descriptions. What emerges is a portrait of something so grotesque, so fundamentally wrong, that merely looking upon it could drive a person mad. The first and most obvious feature is, of course, the absence of a head upon the shoulders. Where a neck should connect to a head, there is nothing. Some accounts describe a clean, almost surgical severing, while others speak of a ragged stump. But this headlessness is not an absence in the truest sense, for the Dullahan does possess a head. He simply does not wear it in the conventional manner. Instead, the severed head is carried. In most tellings, the Dullahan holds it tucked under his right arm, or perhaps aloft in his right hand, using it much as one might use a lantern to light the way. In some variations, the head sits balanced upon the pommel of the saddle, surveying the countryside as the horse gallops through the night. However it is positioned, the head remains animate, its eyes moving, its mouth capable of speech. This detail is particularly disturbing because it suggests that the Dullahan is not truly dead, but exists in some terrible in-between state, severed yet living, ended yet continuing. Thomas Crofton Croker, in his 1825 collection, provided what remains one of the most vivid and disturbing descriptions of the Dullahan's head, drawn from a tale called The Headless Horseman. In this account, the head looked like a large cream cheese hung round with black puddings. No speck of colour enlivened the eshy paleness of the depressed features. The skin lay stretched over the unearthly surface almost like the parchment head of a drum. This comparison to cheese, to something soft and white and slightly rotten, appears in multiple accounts. The skin is described as having the colour and consistency of mouldy cheese or stale dough, a sickly, pale white that suggests decay. But it is the face itself that inspires the greatest horror. The eyes are often described as small and black, darting about constantly like flies or like live coals, never resting, always searching. Some accounts speak of them as being massive instead, huge orbs that glow with an inner fire, granting the Dullahan supernatural vision that can pierce the darkest night and see for miles in every direction. These eyes can see into houses, through walls, across vast distances. Nothing is hidden from the Dullahan's gaze. When he looks at you, he sees not just your physical form but something deeper, perhaps the very state of your soul, the nearness of your death. The mouth is universally described as horrifying. It stretches from ear to ear in a permanent, idiotic grin, showing rows of sharp teeth. This is not the smile of joy or even of malice, but rather the rictus of death itself, the grimace of a corpse frozen in the moment of its final agony. Some accounts describe the grin as reaching so far that it appears the top of the head might simply fall off. The mouth does not move naturally when the Dullahan speaks. Instead, the voice seems to emanate from the head as if from some unnatural source. The head glows. This detail appears again and again in the folklore. The entire head is said to glow with the phosphorescence of decaying matter, of things that rot in dark places, of corpse light and swamp gas and all the eerie luminescence associated with death. This ghastly glow serves the Dullahan as a lantern, lighting his way along darkened roads and casting nightmarish shadows that dance and writhe in the darkness. But the head is only part of the nightmare. The body, though lacking this most essential piece, is no less terrible. The Dullahan is invariably described as being clad entirely in black. In most accounts, he wears a long black cloak or coat, sometimes described as being of an old-fashioned cut, sometimes as flowing and indeterminate, as if made of shadow itself. Some stories speak of a black, single-breasted hunting jacket with massive shining buttons positioned oddly far apart. The clothing is always dark, always funereal, perfectly suited to the being's role as a harbinger of death. The Dullahan carries with him an implement that adds yet another layer of horror to his already nightmarish appearance, a whip. But this is no ordinary riding crop or leather lash. According to the folklore, the Dullahan's whip is fashioned from a human spine, the vertebrae still articulated, the whole grotesque thing dried and hardened into a functional tool. He uses this spine whip with terrible efficiency, cracking it through the air to drive his horses faster or lashing out at anyone foolish enough to look upon him. The whip can strike with supernatural precision across impossible distances, and those struck by it are said to be blinded instantly, their eyes whipped right out of their heads. The horse upon which the Dullahan rides is as unnatural as its rider. It is always described as black, black as the void, black as the deepest part of the night sky where no stars shine. But this is a black that goes beyond mere color. It is the blackness of negation, of absence, of something that seems to absorb light rather than merely reflect its absence. The horse's eyes burn like hot coals or like flames, casting a reddish glow. Its nostrils flare wide, and some accounts claim that sparks and flames shoot from them with every breath, as if the beast's very lungs contain an infernal fire. The horse's hooves strike the ground with such force that they leave scorch marks, setting hedges alight as it passes. The sound of these hooves is distinctive and terrifying, not the clean, sharp clip-clop of a normal horse, but a heavy, thunderous pounding that seems to shake the very earth. People who have claimed to hear the Dullahan's horse approach speak of feeling the vibrations through their feet long before the creature comes into view, of that growing rumble that promises something terrible is drawing near. In some versions of the legend, particularly those from County Tyrone and other northern regions, the Dullahan does not ride a single horse but instead drives a coach. This coach, known as the Cóiste Bodhar, is itself a thing of nightmares, drawn by a team of 6 black horses, all of them headless. The coach is massive, constructed of ancient wood gone black with age, and it is adorned with the most macabre decorations imaginable. The wheel spokes are fashioned from human thigh bones. The axle is a human spine. The lanterns that hang from its sides are human skulls with candles burning inside them, their empty eye sockets glowing with flickering flame. The covering of the coach is made from a funeral pall, moth-eaten and worm-chewed, reeking of damp and decay. Some accounts even claim that a coffin is mounted upon the back of the coach, ready to receive whatever soul the Dullahan has come to collect. Whether mounted on a single steed or driving his death coach, the Dullahan presents a figure calculated to inspire absolute terror. He is wrong in every particular, a violation of the natural order. A being should have its head attached. A whip should not be made of human remains. Horses should not breathe fire. Coaches should not be decorated with bones and skulls. Yet the Dullahan is all of these impossible, horrible things made manifest, riding through the Irish countryside with grim purpose. Those who have seen him, or claim to have seen him, speak of being paralyzed with fear, unable to run or even to look away. They describe a cold that settles into their bones, a dread that goes beyond rational fear into something primal and overwhelming. Many who encounter the Dullahan do not remember the experience clearly afterwards, as if their minds have mercifully clouded the details, protecting them from the full horror of what they witnessed. Others remember all too clearly and are never quite the same afterwards, jumping at shadows, refusing to travel alone at night, crossing themselves constantly and carrying protective charms wherever they go. This is what the Dullahan looks like. He is death-given form, decay made animate, everything about the grave and the tomb brought to terrible life. He is the nightmare that gallops through the darkness, and once seen, he can never be forgotten. The death coach, Cóiste Bodhar. While the image of the solitary Dullahan riding his black steed is the most widely recognized version of the legend, there exists another manifestation of this dark entity that is, if anything, even more terrifying. This is the Cóiste Bodhar, a name that translates to deaf coach or silent coach, though silent is perhaps a deceptive term for something that announces its presence with such unmistakable thunder. The Cóiste Bodhar is first and foremost a death coach, a spectral vehicle that emerges from graveyards and charnel houses to collect the souls of the dying. Unlike the solitary Dullahan on horseback, who might appear anywhere at any time, the death coach seems to be reserved for occasions of particular significance or for collecting souls from specific locations. When the Cóiste Bodhar comes for you, death is not merely near but inevitable and imminent. The coach must not return empty. Once it has been summoned forth, once it has begun its journey, a soul must be collected. Picture the scene, a quiet village in rural Ireland, long after midnight when honest folk are asleep in their beds. The streets are empty, lit only by the faint glow of stars and perhaps a lantern or two left burning in cottage windows. Then, from the direction of the churchyard, comes a sound. At first, it might be mistaken for distant thunder, but it does not fade as thunder should. Instead, it grows louder, more distinct. It is the rumbling of wheels upon cobblestones, the creaking of ancient wood, the thunder of multiple hooves beating against the earth in perfect, terrible synchrony. Those who hear it know immediately what approaches. They bolt their doors. They shutter their windows. They hide under blankets and say frantic prayers, begging that the coach will pass them by, that it has come for someone else, anyone else. For once the Cóiste Bodhar stops at your door, your fate is sealed. The coach itself is a thing born of nightmares and death itself. In size, it is immense, far larger than any normal carriage, black as pitch and constructed of wood so old and dark it seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. The paint, if it was ever painted, has long since weathered away, leaving bare wood that has been seasoned by centuries of night air and grave mist. Every joint creaks with a sound like old bones grinding together. Every board groans under some invisible weight. But it is the decorations of the coach that truly reveal its nature. As mentioned, the wheel spokes are not carved wood but human thigh bones, femurs that have been bleached white and hardened by time. They radiate out from the wheel hubs like the bars of some terrible cage. The axles upon which the wheels turn are human spines, vertebrae still articulated, still flexible enough to turn but hardened into something that can bear the weight of the coach. With every revolution of the wheels, these spine axles creak and pop in a rhythm that sounds disturbingly organic, like joints cracking. Mounted on either side of the coach, serving as lanterns to light its way, are human skulls. Not mere replicas or carvings, but actual skulls, hollow and grinning. Inside each skull, a candle burns with a guttering, irregular flame that casts dancing shadows. The light that shines through the empty eye sockets is a sickly yellow-green, the color of corpse fire, of will-o'-the-wisps that lead travelers astray in bogs. This light does not illuminate so much as it reveals, picking out details in the darkness that might be better left unseen. The body of the coach is draped with a funeral pall, a cloth that would normally be laid over a coffin during burial rites. But this pall has seen better days. It is moth-eaten and worm-chewed, hanging in tatters. The fabric is mildewed, damp with grave moisture, and exudes the unmistakable smell of decay, that sickly-sweet scent of things long dead and rotting. In some accounts, this pall shifts and moves of its own accord, rippling as though something beneath it is trying to get out, though no wind stirs the air. Perhaps most disturbingly, many versions of the legend speak of a coffin mounted on the back of the coach. It sits there openly, lid closed but ready to receive its occupant. The wood of this coffin is as black and ancient as the coach itself, fitted together without nails, held by joints that have been worn smooth by countless journeys. Sometimes the coffin is empty, waiting. Sometimes it already contains a body, the shell of some other soul the Dullahan has collected on earlier stops. Either way, its presence is a stark reminder of the coach's purpose and the fate that awaits whoever sees it stop at their door. But the horses are perhaps the most disturbing element of all. The Cóiste Bodhar is drawn by a team of 6 horses, though some accounts speak of 4. Like their master's steed, these horses are black beyond black, their coats seeming to drink in the darkness. But unlike a single horse, where the Dullahan might ride with his head tucked under his arm, these coach horses are themselves headless. 6 massive, powerful horses, each lacking a head, yet somehow still able to run with perfect coordination, never stumbling, never faltering. Their necks end in ragged stumps. No blood flows. These are not fresh wounds but ancient severances, part of what these creatures have become. From the stumps emerge flames and smoke with each exhalation, as if the breath that should come from nostrils instead escapes from the severed necks themselves. The sound they make is not the neighing of horses but a hollow roaring, like wind through a tunnel, like the breath of some great furnace. These headless horses run at impossible speeds. They move so fast that the friction of their hooves striking the road creates sparks, bright orange-red cascades that trail behind the coach like a comet's tail. In dry conditions, these sparks can set roadside vegetation alight. Hedgerows burst into flame as the coach passes. Hayricks ignite. The very air seems to crackle with heat and energy. The coach leaves a trail of small fires in its wake, marking its passage through the countryside. And yet, for all this noise and fury, the coach is also called silent or deaf. This apparent contradiction has puzzled many, but it makes a terrible kind of sense. The coach is deaf in that it cannot be reasoned with, cannot be called back, cannot hear pleas or prayers. It is also silent in that those inside it hear nothing of the outside world. The souls it carries are already cut off from the living, already transitioning to whatever comes next. From inside the coach, the world falls silent. The Dullahan himself sits at the front of this nightmare vehicle, reins in hand, his severed head held high or tucked under his arm, eyes scanning the darkness for his destination. He drives the team with brutal efficiency, using his spine whip to urge the headless horses ever faster. The crack of that whip echoes through the night like gunshots, sharp and startling. When the Cóiste Bodhar travels, it moves with inexorable purpose. No obstacle can stop it. Gates that are locked fly open as it approaches, the locks bursting without any hand touching them. Doors that are barred swing wide. Even the gates of graveyards, chained and padlocked, burst open to let the coach through. It is as if the physical world recognizes the authority of death itself and yields before it. There is a curious detail in many accounts of the death coach. If it is approaching and you hear it in time, you should open any gates that lie in its path. This seems counterintuitive. Why would you want to help this terrible thing? But the logic becomes clear with understanding. The Cóiste Bodhar will pass through any barrier, but if you open the gates willingly, if you clear its path, it will continue onward. It will not stop. It will pass you by. But if the gates are locked, if barriers stand in its way, it must pause, even if just for a moment, to burst through them. And when it pauses, it might look around and notice someone it had not come for initially. It might decide to collect an extra soul, since it is stopped anyway. The most famous account of someone opening gates for the death coach comes from County Clare in 1876. A servant of the McNamara family was walking the grounds of Anisterman House late at night, when he heard the unmistakable rumbling of wheels approaching. Immediately recognizing what was coming, the servant ran ahead of the sound, opening 3 successive gates along the avenue leading to the house. Then he threw himself face down on the ground beside the road, hands over his ears, praying desperately that he would not be seen. The Cóiste Bodhar came thundering past, moving at tremendous speed. The servant, even with his face pressed to the earth and his hands covering his ears, could feel the heat of it, could hear the roar of those headless horses, could sense rather than see the huge dark bulk of the coach as it hurtled by. But it did not stop. It continued down the road and vanished into the distance. The servant lay there for long minutes, trembling, hardly daring to believe he had survived. The next day, news arrived that Admiral Sir Burton McNamara had died in London. The death coach had been coming for him, crossing the distance between England and Ireland in a single night to collect his soul. Because the gates had been opened, because the path had been cleared, it had not stopped at Anisterman House itself, but had continued onward to wherever the Admiral's spirit had fled. This account, documented by Thomas Johnston Westrop in his 1910 Folklore Survey of County Clare, has become one of the most famous stories associated with the death coach. It encapsulates several key elements of the legend. The coach's ability to travel impossible distances, at least in the interpretation of believers who connected the timing of the coach sighting with the Admiral's death, its single-minded purpose, the way it can be somewhat managed, if not deterred, by those who understand its nature, and the absolute terror it inspires in those who encounter it. The Cóiste Bodhar is also sometimes associated with the banshee, that other great harbinger of death in Irish folklore. In some accounts, a banshee flies alongside the coach, wailing and keening, announcing to certain families that one of their members is about to die. The combination of the banshee's cry and the rumbling of the death coach creates a symphony of death, an announcement that cannot be ignored or mistaken for anything else. When the coach finally stops at its destination, the Dullahan will climb down from his seat. He will approach the door of the house where the dying person lies, and he will call out a name, just once, clear and loud and final. And when that name is spoken, the person dies instantly, wherever they are, whatever they are doing. Their soul is drawn forth, pulled from their body by the power of that summoning, and it enters the coach to be carried away to whatever realm awaits beyond death. There is no escape once the coach has stopped for you. No prayer, no plea, no trickery can save you. The Dullahan has come, and with him comes the end. The only consolation, if it can be called that, is that death from the Dullahan's call is instantaneous. There is no suffering, no prolonged agony. One moment you are alive, the next you are not, your soul already aboard the coach as it rumbles away into the darkness, leaving the living to discover your empty shell. The Cóiste Bodhar represents death in its most impersonal and inevitable form. It is not cruel, but neither is it kind. It simply is, as death simply is, coming for all eventually. The coach serves as a stark reminder that no one is too important, too wealthy, too powerful to escape their final fate. Admiral and peasant, lord and servant, all are equal before the death coach. When it comes, you must go. Crom Dubh, the dark god's transformation. To understand where the Dullahan truly comes from, to grasp the deepest roots of this legend, we must travel back in time. Back past the Christian centuries, past the monasteries and the missionaries, back to a darker age when the gods of Ireland demanded blood and the people paid that price willingly, desperately, praying for good harvests and healthy cattle. We must speak of Crom Dubh, the Dark One, the god who became a monster. Crom Dubb's proper name was likely Crom Cruach, which translates approximately to crooked one of the mound or bent one of blood, depending on which etymological interpretation you follow. He is also called Sen Cruach or Sen Croithai, meaning head of all gods or lord of the mound. All of these names speak to his importance in the pre-Christian Irish pantheon. This was not some minor spirit or local deity. Crom Cruach was the chief god, the most important of all Irish divinities in certain regions, particularly in the area around Marf Slecht, the plain of prostrations, in what is now County Cavan. The medieval texts that describe Crom Cruach paint a picture of a fertility god whose worship centered on sacrifice. He promised abundance, good yields of milk and grain, healthy livestock, prosperity for the community. But his gifts came at a terrible price. According to these accounts, Crom Cruach demanded that the firstborn of every family and the firstborn of every herd be sacrificed to him. And not just any sacrifice, but a specific, brutal method, decapitation. On the Feast of Samhain, When the veil between worlds grew thin and the year died to be reborn, the people would gather at Marf Slecht. There stood Crom Cruach's idol, a central figure covered in gold, surrounded by 12 other figures of stone or bronze. Before these idols, the people would perform their terrible duty. Children would have their heads struck off, their blood poured upon the gold idol. Calves and lambs would be similarly sacrificed, their severed heads arranged before the god. The medieval texts, written by Christian monks who viewed these pagan practices with horror, claim that these sacrifices happened regularly, that generation after generation of Irish people participated in this gruesome worship. They tell of King Tigernmas, who according to these same medieval chronicles supposedly ruled Ireland in the distant past, and who was said to have normalized and even increased these sacrificial practices. Whether Tigernmas was a historical figure or a legendary construct remains uncertain, but within the framework of these stories, his reign represented the height of Crom Cruach's worship. But then came tragedy. According to the annals of the Four Masters and other medieval sources, on one Samhain Eve, Tigernmas brought his entire court and 3/4 of his army to Marf Slecht for the sacrificial rites. But something went wrong. Perhaps Crom Cruach was displeased. Perhaps the sacrifices were performed incorrectly. Or perhaps the god decided he wanted more than what was offered. The texts describe a disaster. Tigernmas himself died before the idol, along with most of his people. They died on their knees, some accounts say, still in the act of prostrating themselves before their god. 3,000 men perished that night, leaving the plain literally carpeted with bodies. Whether this account represents historical fact or Christian propaganda designed to demonstrate the dangers of pagan worship is debatable. Many modern scholars suspect the latter. But true or not, the story established Crom Cruach as a dangerous deity, one who might turn on his own worshippers, who could not truly be trusted even if his demands were met. Enter Saint Patrick, Ireland's patron saint and the man credited with bringing Christianity to the island. The medieval lives of Patrick describe his confrontation with Crom Cruach's idol at Marf Slecht. In the tripartite life of Patrick, written in the 9th century, the saint approaches the pagan shrine with his crozier, his bishop's staff. When he raises it against the idol, the golden figure falls face forward, the imprint of Patrick's crozier left forever in its surface. The 12 surrounding idols sink into the earth, swallowed up and hidden from sight. The demon that inhabited the golden figure appears before Patrick, but the saint curses it and casts it into hell. In another version, told in Jocelyn's 12th century Life and Acts of St. Patrick, when the idol falls, all the gold and silver covering it crumbles to dust, leaving only bare stone with the crozier's imprint. The god, or the demon, or whatever spirit inhabited the idol is defeated, driven out, ended. But was it truly ended? This is where later storytellers began to weave the Dullahan into the tale. The idea that connects Crom Cruach to the Dullahan appears to be a development from more recent centuries rather than ancient tradition. This theory suggests that the god did not simply vanish when Patrick destroyed his idol and ended the practice of human sacrifice. Instead, deprived of his worship and his blood offerings, Crom Cruach transformed. He took physical form and continued his work by other means. Since he could no longer receive the heads of sacrificial victims brought willingly to his altar, he would take them himself, riding through the night to claim the souls he believed were his due. This interpretation would explain several key elements of the Dullahan legend if it were accurate. First, the emphasis on decapitation. The Dullahan is headless, and he is associated with death by loss of one's head, which would mirror the method of sacrifice Crom Cruach once demanded. Second, the connection to Samhain and other feast days. The Dullahan is most active during these liminal times, just as Crom Cruach's sacrifices were performed on these occasions. Third, the unstoppable nature of the Dullahan. Like a god who will not be denied, the Dullahan cannot be barred or deterred, forcing his way past any obstacle. However, as scholars have pointed out, there are significant problems with this theory. The connection between Crom Dubh and the Dullahan appears primarily in later folklore compilations and modern retellings rather than in the oldest sources. The earliest written descriptions of the Dullahan, from the early 1800s, do not explicitly make this connection. It appears to be a later development, perhaps an attempt to give the Dullahan a grander, more mythological origin than he originally possessed. The historical reality is likely that the Dullahan and Crom Dubh began as separate entities in Irish folklore, and were only connected by later storytellers seeking to create a more complete mythology. Nevertheless, the association has become firmly established in the popular imagination. Crom Dubh, a later folk incarnation of Crom Dubh, is now inextricably linked with the Dullahan in most tellings of the legend. The dark god became the dark man, trading his golden idol for a black horse, his altar for the lonely roads of Ireland, but continuing his harvest of human souls. There is something deeply appealing about this origin story. It frames the Dullahan not as a random monster or a malicious ghost, but as the remnant of something ancient, as the memory of old power that refuses to die. It suggests that the gods do not simply vanish when their worship ends, but linger on in transformed states, hunting through the shadows, seeking what was once given to them freely. The name Crom Dubh means dark crom or black crom, using that same word dub that appears in Dullahan. The linguistic connection reinforces the thematic one. Both names speak of darkness, of something that has been driven from the light but continues to exist in shadow. Interestingly, Crom Dubh survived in Irish tradition long after the supposed ending of his worship. There is a day called Domhnach Crom Dubh Sunday, traditionally celebrated on the last Sunday of July or the first Sunday of August. This date coincides with Lunasad, the harvest festival. On this day, even in Christian times, people would climb sacred hills, leave offerings at holy wells, and celebrate the first fruits of the harvest. The rituals changed their surface appearance, becoming Christianized, but echoes of the older worship remained. Some scholars see in these practices the continuation of Crom Dubb's cult in a form acceptable to the new religion. There are even folk tales of Crom Dubh becoming St. Patrick's servant after his defeat, a reconciliation that allowed elements of the old belief to persist within the new. In one such tale, Crom Dubh asks Patrick when the fairies will go to paradise, and Patrick answers, "Not till the day of judgment." The fairies, hearing this, stopped doing magical farm work they had been performing, and from that day forward, humans must do all their agricultural labor themselves. It is a charming story, but it also represents a fascinating theological compromise, allowing the pagan past to exist alongside the Christian present. Whether or not Crom Dubh truly became the Dullahan in some mystical transformation, the connection serves an important cultural function. It roots the Dullahan in Ireland's deepest past, making him more than just a scary story but a piece of living mythology, a thread that connects modern Ireland to its ancient, pre-Christian roots. He becomes a reminder that the old gods are not gone, merely sleeping, and that the darkness they represented still rides through the Irish night, calling names and claiming souls. The Dullahan's terrible powers. What makes the Dullahan so terrifying is not merely his appearance, grotesque though it is, but his powers. He is not simply a frightening ghost or a dangerous monster that might be avoided or outwitted. He possesses abilities that make him nearly unstoppable, that mark him as something far beyond the ordinary supernatural beings of folklore. To encounter the Dullahan is to face death itself, armed with powers that defy the natural order. The most famous and most terrible of the Dullahan's powers, according to Irish folklore, is his ability to summon souls with a spoken name. The legend describes this power in a very specific way. The Dullahan can speak only once during his journey. He does not engage in conversation. He does not threaten or explain or bargain. He has one word to speak, one name to call, and when he calls it, that person dies instantly. It does not matter where they are. It does not matter what they are doing. It does not matter if they are healthy or sick, young or old, prepared or unprepared. When the Dullahan speaks their name, according to the tales, they die. The death is said to be immediate and absolute. In the stories passed down through generations, witnesses describe people who were in the middle of speaking when the Dullahan called their name. The words died on their lips. They collapsed where they stood or sat, eyes vacant, life extinguished as swiftly and completely as blowing out a candle. There is no pain, no suffering, no time to make peace or say goodbye. Just the ending. This power means that seeing the Dullahan is not necessarily the danger. He might ride past you, might even look directly at you, and you will live, provided your name is not the one he has come to speak. But if you are the one whose name is on his lips, there is no escape. You cannot hide from your own name. You cannot pretend to be someone else. When death calls you by name, you must answer. According to the folklore, the Dullahan possesses supernatural vision that allows him to see vast distances and through obstacles. He holds his severed head aloft, using it as a lamp, and those dead eyes are said to pierce the darkness of the deepest night. The stories claim he can see through walls, through doors, through any barrier. If you hide in your home, bolt the door, close the shutters, pile furniture against the entrance, the Dullahan can still see you, or so the warnings went. His gaze finds you wherever you cower, marking you, knowing you. This vision, in the tales, is not limited to simple sight. The Dullahan can apparently see the approach of death itself, can sense those whose time is near. This is how he knows where to ride, whose name to call. He sees death hovering around certain individuals, sees the thinning of the veil between life and whatever comes after. He is drawn to these people like a moth to flame, or perhaps more accurately, like flame to a moth, consuming what is already fragile and ready to burn. In the legend, the Dullahan can move with impossible speed. His horse can supposedly cross Ireland in a single night, can traverse distances that would take a normal rider days or weeks. In the account of the McNamara servant, believers claimed the death coach travelled from Inistaman House in County Clare to London and back in essentially no time at all, crossing the Irish Sea as easily as it crossed a country lane. This would suggest that the Dullahan exists partly outside normal space, that the rules of distance and geography bend around him, at least according to those who accepted the legend as truth. Perhaps most frustratingly for those who might wish to avoid him, the Dullahan cannot be barred from any location. Every gate swings open before him. Every lock bursts. Every chain snaps. Doors that are bolted fly open when he approaches. Even the gates of graveyards, locked and sealed against grave robbers and vandals, cannot keep him out. He passes through the world as if all its barriers are mere suggestions, inconveniences to be brushed aside with contemptuous ease. This power means that no refuge is truly safe. Your home is not secure. A church, despite its holy ground and sacred symbols, offers no protection. Even if you managed to seal yourself in a room with no doors, the Dullahan would find a way. The physical world simply cannot contain or constrain him. The Dullahan wields his spine whip with devastating effect. This grotesque weapon can strike across impossible distances, and with perfect accuracy. If you are foolish enough to look directly at the Dullahan as he passes, if you stare at him instead of averting your eyes, he will lash out with the whip. The spine bone cuts through the air with a sound like cracking thunder, and it strikes your eyes. Not near them, not at your face generally, but precisely, specifically at your eyes. The result is immediate and permanent blindness. Some accounts say the whip literally removes your eyes, plucking them from their sockets. Others describe a more metaphorical blinding, where the sight is destroyed but the physical eye remains. Either way, those struck by the Dullahan's whip never see again. They spend the rest of their lives in darkness, constantly reminded of their encounter with the harbinger of death. This power serves as a deterrent. The Dullahan prefers to move unseen, or at least not directly observed. By blinding those who look at him, he enforces a kind of don't ask, don't tell policy. If you see him passing, look away immediately. Do not stare. Do not try to get a better view. Do not let curiosity overcome fear. Because if you look too long, if your gaze lingers on that terrible figure, you will never look upon anything else again. In some accounts, the Dullahan carries a basin of blood, and he will throw this blood in the face of anyone who opens their door to him. Being splashed with this blood is said to mark you for death, though perhaps not immediate death. You become tainted, touched by the grave, and your own demise will come sooner than it otherwise would have. The blood is described as having an indescribable smell, worse than any corruption or decay, and those splashed with it can never quite wash it away. They can scrub their skin raw, but they continue to smell the blood, continue to feel its cold weight upon them. The Dullahan's mere presence causes supernatural effects in his vicinity. Animals panic and flee. Dogs howl and cower. Horses, normally brave creatures, will refuse to move if they sense the Dullahan is near. Birds fall silent. Even insects stop their chirping. The natural world recognizes something fundamentally wrong and reacts accordingly. The air grows cold when the Dullahan approaches, not the clean cold of winter but the clammy cold of the grave, of places where the sun never reaches. This cold seeps into your bones. It makes your teeth chatter and your hands shake, and no amount of warmth can drive it out. People who have been near when the Dullahan passed describe shivering for hours or even days afterward, unable to get warm. Fires dim in his presence. Candles gutter and threaten to go out. Lanterns flicker. Even hearth fires that have been burning steadily for hours will suddenly die down to embers, as if the Dullahan drains the heat and light from everything around him. This is death's effect on life, the ending's effect on continuation, the cold of the grave overcoming the warmth of the living world. Finally, and perhaps most insidiously, people who encounter the Dullahan often cannot remember the experience clearly afterward, or so the stories suggest. Details become fuzzy. The timeline gets confused. They know something terrible happened, can feel the weight of the encounter pressing on their minds, but the specifics slip away like water through fingers. Whether this is the mind's natural way of protecting itself from trauma, or represents another of the Dullahan's legendary powers, an enforced forgetting that prevents people from preparing against him, from spreading too much detailed information about his abilities and weaknesses, remains a matter of interpretation. These powers combined make the Dullahan nearly invincible. He sees everything, moves anywhere, strikes at will, and kills with a word. He cannot be locked out, cannot be fought, cannot be reasoned with. He is death personified, and death, as the saying goes, always wins in the end. Gold, the mysterious protection. In a world where the Dullahan possesses such overwhelming power, where he cannot be barred or fought or avoided, there seems to be no hope for those unlucky enough to cross his path. And yet, Irish folklore speaks of one curious weakness, one peculiar substance that can turn aside even this most terrible of beings, gold. The assertion that gold repels or frightens the Dullahan appears consistently across numerous sources, yet it remains one of the most mysterious and least explained elements of the legend. Why gold? Why not silver, which is traditionally associated with protection against supernatural threats? Why not iron, which folklore claims can harm fairy folk? Why this one specific metal, and why does it have such an effect on a being as powerful as the Dullahan? The accounts of gold's protective properties are specific and consistent. Even the smallest amount of gold is said to be effective. You do not need a king's ransom or even a significant quantity. A single gold coin, a gold ring, a small piece of gold jewelry, even a gold-headed pin, any of these can serve as protection. The key is that the gold must be genuine, gold-colored metal or gold paint will not suffice. The Dullahan can apparently tell the difference, can sense true gold and is repelled by it. The most famous account demonstrating this protection comes from County Galway. A man was walking home one night along the road between Roundstone and Ballyconneely. Darkness had fallen, and he was hurrying, knowing that these lonely roads were dangerous after sunset. Suddenly, he heard the pounding of hooves behind him, growing louder, coming fast. He turned and saw the Dullahan charging toward him on his black steed, head held high in one hand, the other gripping the reins. Terror seized the man. He began to run, but he knew he could not outpace a horse. The Dullahan was gaining on him, closer and closer, and the man could almost feel the cold that preceded the terrible rider. In desperation, he reached into his shirt where he wore a pin with a gold head, a small decoration that had belonged to his grandfather. He pulled it free and, without even looking behind him, flung it over his shoulder onto the road. There was a roar in the air, a sound like wind and rage and something else, something beyond description. The man threw himself to the ground and covered his head. When he finally dared to look up, the Dullahan was gone. Vanished. The road was empty, silent except for the man's own ragged breathing. The gold pin had saved him. This account, and others like it, established gold as a reliable deterrent against the Dullahan. As a result, it became common practice in parts of Ireland for people to carry gold items with them, especially when travelling at night or during the feast days when the Dullahan was known to ride. Even those who did not firmly believe in the legend might carry a gold coin just in case, a small insurance policy against an improbable but terrifying possibility. But why does gold work? Various theories have been proposed, though none are entirely satisfying. One theory draws on gold's traditional association with the sun and with divine power. Gold is the metal of kings and gods, the metal used in sacred objects and royal regalia. It represents light, purity, the power of heaven and day. The Dullahan, as a creature of darkness and death, would naturally be opposed to such symbolism. Gold is everything he is not, bright where he is dark, valuable where he represents loss, eternal where he represents ending. By this logic, gold acts as a sort of spiritual opposite to the Dullahan's nature, repelling him the way light drives back darkness. Another theory focuses on gold's incorruptibility. Unlike iron, which rusts, or silver, which tarnishes, gold remains unchanged by time. It does not decay. It does not rot. It is, in its own way, eternal. The Dullahan, as the harbinger of decay and death, cannot tolerate this symbol of permanence. Gold mocks his power by existing unchanged in a world where everything else deteriorates and dies. A more practical theory suggests that the gold connection might have been added to the legend as a form of social control. If people believed that carrying gold would protect them from the Dullahan, they would be more likely to carry and preserve gold items rather than spending or losing them. This would have been particularly important in a historically poor society where gold represented significant wealth. The legend becomes a way of encouraging people to hold onto valuable assets. Still another theory connects gold to pre-Christian beliefs about fairy folk. In Irish folklore, fairies are often said to be repelled or harmed by iron, which is a metal of human craft and civilization. But the Dullahan is sometimes described as a type of dark fairy, an unseelie creature. Perhaps gold, being a natural metal found in the earth and not worked by human hands into tools or weapons, has a different effect on fairy folk than iron does. Perhaps gold represents something pure and uncorrupted that fairies, especially dark ones, cannot bear. Some scholars have questioned whether the gold element was original to the Dullahan legend at all. As mentioned earlier, the earliest written references to the Dullahan, such as Charles Valence's 1802 description, do not mention gold. Even Thomas Crofton Croker's detailed accounts from the 1820s make no reference to gold as a protective measure. The gold protection appears more prominently in later sources, particularly gaining widespread attention through Bob Curran's 1997 Field Guide to Irish Fairies, and the numerous websites and books that drew upon it afterward. This has led some researchers to suggest that the gold element might be a later addition to the legend, a bit of creative folklore that has become so widespread it is now accepted as authentic tradition. However, oral accounts from County Galway and other regions that predate Curran's book do mention gold, suggesting that the connection, while perhaps not ancient, is at least not entirely modern either. It may represent an authentic regional variation that was less known until more recent compilations brought it to wider attention. Regardless of its origins or the explanation for its effectiveness, the gold protection has become an integral part of how Irish people understood the Dullahan threat. It offered a glimmer of hope in an otherwise hopeless situation. Yes, the Dullahan was terrifying and nearly unstoppable, but there was something you could do. You could carry gold. You could have a defense. This psychological importance cannot be overstated. Fear is more bearable when there is an action one can take, even a small one. The gold protection transformed the Dullahan from an absolutely unavoidable doom into a threat that could be mitigated with proper preparation. It gave people a sense of agency, however slight. Interestingly, the gold protection only works if you are not the person the Dullahan has come to name. If he has arrived specifically to call your name, no amount of gold will save you. Your death has been decreed by forces beyond the Dullahan himself, and he is merely the messenger, the instrument. But if you simply happen to encounter him while he is on his way to someone else, then gold can turn him aside, can keep you safe from his whip, can prevent him from deciding to take an extra soul while he is out riding. This limitation is important because it preserves the Dullahan's role as an inevitability. Death cannot ultimately be avoided, only postponed. If it is truly your time, your appointed hour, then nothing will save you, not even magical gold. But if death has not yet called your name, if you encounter its herald by mischance rather than appointment, then you might escape. The gold gives you a fighting chance in circumstances where chance still exists. In practical terms, the gold tradition led to various customs throughout Ireland. Brides would be sure to wear gold jewelry at their weddings. Travelers would carry gold coins. Parents would give their children small gold items to keep in their pockets. Gold became a protective talisman, right alongside more obviously religious items like blessed medals or holy water. The tradition has not entirely died out even in modern times. In parts of rural Ireland, particularly among older generations, you will still find people who keep a gold coin or piece of gold jewelry specifically for protection, even if they laugh off the superstition. Just in case, they say, with a wink and a smile that does not quite reach their eyes. Because deep down, in the part of the mind that still believes in the dark and the old stories, they wonder. And wondering, they keep their gold close, a small shield against the night and what might ride through it. Recorded encounters and eyewitness accounts. While the Dullahan is clearly a figure of legend, numerous accounts exist of people who claim to have encountered him, or at least to have experienced something they interpreted as an encounter with the Headless Rider or his death coach. These accounts, collected by folklorists and recorded in various sources, offer fascinating glimpses into how the legend was experienced and understood by those who believed in it absolutely. The most comprehensive early collection of Dullahan encounters comes from Thomas Crofton Croker's Fairy Legends and Traditions of the South of Ireland, published between 1825 and 1828. Croker, an antiquarian and folklorist working in the early 19th century, gathered stories from throughout southern Ireland, particularly County Cork and surrounding regions. His work remains the foundation upon which most modern understanding of the Dullahan is built, and many of the specific details we associate with the creature come directly from his collected tales. One of Croker's stories, Hanlon's Mill, tells of Michael Noonan, called Mick, who encountered the death coach while returning home from a trip to a shoemaker in Ballyduff. Mick was riding in his cart, his horse plodding along the familiar road, when he suddenly found himself accompanied by an enormous black coach drawn by 6 black horses. The coach appeared silently alongside him, keeping perfect pace with his slower vehicle. Mick immediately knew what he was seeing. He described the coach as being driven by a figure with no head on its shoulders. The driver wore black clothes and held a whip in one hand, but where there should have been a head, there was nothing. The 6 horses pulling the coach were also headless, yet they ran with perfect coordination, their hooves striking the road in a rhythm that was not quite natural. Mick wisely did not look directly at the coach for long. He kept his eyes forward, gripped his reins tightly, and tried not to show his terror. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only moments, the coach suddenly accelerated, pulling ahead of Mick's cart and disappearing into the darkness ahead. Mick made it home safely, but he was shaken by the experience. The next morning, news arrived that Master Rickson of Ballygiblin had suffered a sudden fit and died during the night, at approximately the same time Mick had encountered the coach. The Cóiste Bodhar had been on its way to collect Rickson's soul. Another of Croker's tales, the Headless Horseman, provides a somewhat different account. In this story, Charlie Culnane is riding home late one night when he sees a disembodied horse's head floating through the air, moving rapidly along the road. The head is white with cropped ears and massive eyes that glow within a light. It passes Charlie and disappears, but shortly afterward, a headless horseman appears, riding a horse that itself has no head visible but seems to have a floating head moving ahead of it. Rather than being terrified, Charlie is curious. When the Headless Horseman speaks to him, asking if he wants help winning future horse races, Charlie accepts. The ghostly figure explains that he was once a man who broke his neck and his horse's neck at the bottom of a nearby hill. Now he rides endlessly, looking for a brave man to help. He promises to assist Charlie in races, and true to his word, Charlie's old mare wins races she has no business winning afterward. This account differs significantly from the more typical Dullahan stories. The figure here is not malevolent but rather helpful, and he is explicitly the ghost of a man who died by accident rather than some manifestation of an ancient god. Some scholars suggest this might represent a different folkloric entity that later became conflated with the Dullahan, or perhaps a regional variation of the legend. The account of the McNamara servant from Inisterman House in 1876, collected by Thomas Johnston Westrop, has already been mentioned, but it bears repeating in fuller detail because it is one of the most specific and well-documented Dullahan encounters. The servant, whose name is not recorded, was making his rounds of the property late on the night of December 11th. The time was specified as being after midnight but before dawn. In the darkness, he heard the sound of a coach approaching along the back avenue. This was immediately strange because no vehicle should have been arriving at that hour. The servant initially thought perhaps someone was ill and a doctor was arriving urgently, but something about the sound was wrong. It was too loud, too heavy, and it had a quality he could not quite name, something that made his skin prickle and his stomach clench. Realization struck. This was the Cóiste Bodhar, the death coach, coming for Inisterman House, or at least passing through its grounds. The servant did not freeze in terror or flee. Instead, he did precisely what Folklore said he should do. He ran ahead of the coach and opened the 3 gates that stood along the avenue leading to the main house. He threw open each gate as widely as it would go, then flung himself face down on the ground beside the 3rd gate, pressing himself into the earth, hands over his ears. The coach thundered past. Even with his face pressed to the ground and his hands blocking his ears, the servant could hear it, could feel it. The earth shook. The air grew cold. He described a sensation of wrongness, as if reality itself was bending around the passing vehicle. He lay there, not daring to move, until the sound faded completely into the distance. When he finally stood, shaking and pale, the gates remained open, but there was no other sign of the coach's passage. No hoof prints, no wheel ruts, nothing physical at all. But the servant knew what he had experienced. He knew that death had passed through Inisterman House. The next day, December 12th, news arrived that Admiral Sir Burton McNamara had died in London. The timing matched. The coach had been on its way to collect his soul, crossing from Ireland to England in no time at all. Because the gates had been opened, because the path had been cleared, it had not stopped at the house but had continued on to its final destination. From County Galway comes another account, this one less formal but equally compelling. A farmer, name unknown, was walking between two small villages late one evening. The moon was barely a sliver, and the darkness was nearly complete. He heard hoofbeats approaching from behind and assumed it was simply another traveller on the road. But as the hoofbeats grew closer, the farmer began to feel uneasy. There was something about the rhythm that did not sound quite right. The pace was too fast, too aggressive. The sound seemed to come from more directions than it should. He turned to look and saw the Dullahan bearing down on him, black horse and black rider, and that terrible severed head held high. The farmer ran. He was not young, and running was difficult, but terror lent him speed. He could hear the Dullahan gaining on him, could feel the cold radiating from the approaching rider. In desperation, he reached for the gold pin he wore in his shirt, a family heirloom he carried for exactly this purpose. He flung it behind him onto the road without even looking. The effect was immediate. The farmer heard a roar of rage and frustration, felt a blast of cold wind, and then nothing. When he looked back, the road was empty. The Dullahan was gone, driven off by the gold. The farmer never found his pin again. He was too frightened to return to that stretch of road to search for it. But he considered it a small price to pay for his life. County Down provides its own encounters. W.J. Fitzpatrick recorded an account from the late 19th century of a man who saw the Dullahan stopped on the brow of a hill between Bryansford and Moniscalp just as the sun was setting. The figure was completely headless but held up its own head in its hand. Fitzpatrick's informant described putting his hands over his ears when the Dullahan's mouth opened, terrified that his own name might be the one spoken. When he looked again, the Dullahan was gone, but shortly afterward, there was a fatal accident on that very hill. A young man died, and the witness was convinced that this was the name the Dullahan had been calling. In County Sligo, William Butler Yeats recorded a second-hand account from a sailor who claimed to have seen the death coach pass through the town in the grey morning light. The coach was described as enormous, black, and silent despite the visible motion of its wheels and the pounding of its horse's hooves. Windows and doors rattled as it passed, though there was no wind. The sailor insisted he saw it clearly, and within a day, someone in the town died suddenly and unexpectedly. These accounts share common elements: the darkness or twilight setting, the sudden appearance, the overwhelming fear, the association with an actual death that occurred around the same time. They also demonstrate the Dullahan's integration into daily life and belief in historical Ireland. These were not just stories told for entertainment, but part of the framework through which people understood and explained death and loss. What is particularly striking about many of these accounts is their matter-of-fact tone. The narrators do not present their experiences as unbelievable or fantastic, but as simply what happened. They saw the Dullahan, or heard the death coach, and someone died. Cause and effect, as natural as rain falling when clouds gather. This casual acceptance speaks to how deeply the belief was embedded in Irish culture. Modern skeptics might explain these accounts in various ways. The sounds attributed to the Dullahan could be natural phenomena misinterpreted in the dark. Wind, distant thunder, normal traffic amplified by fear and expectation. The correlation between sightings and deaths could be coincidental or could represent retroactive attribution. where people remembered a strange experience only after hearing of a death and connected the two events. The power of suggestion and cultural expectation could turn ordinary experiences into supernatural encounters. But for those who experienced these events, for the servant who opened the gates and felt the coach thunder past, for the farmer who threw his gold pin and watched the Dullahan vanish, for all those who heard hoofbeats in the night and knew, absolutely knew, what was coming, these explanations would seem hollow. They knew what they encountered. They met death on the road, and they survived to tell about it, which is more than can be said for many. The banshee and the Dullahan, death's heralds. In the folklore of Ireland, death does not arrive unannounced. It sends its messengers, its heralds, its harbingers that warn the living that the end is near. Two of the most famous of these death omens are the banshee and the Dullahan, and while they serve similar functions, they operate in distinctly different ways. Understanding the relationship between these two entities provides deeper insight into how Irish culture conceptualized and coped with mortality. The banshee, whose name in Irish is Beanside meaning woman of the fairy mound, is perhaps the more widely known of the two. She appears as a female spirit, sometimes young and beautiful, sometimes appearing as a mature woman, sometimes manifesting as an ancient crone. Her defining characteristic is her wail, a keening cry that announces an impending death. When the banshee cries outside a house, someone within that household or family will soon die. The Dullahan, as we have explored at length, is different in several crucial ways. First and most obviously, the Dullahan is typically male, though there are rare accounts of female Dullahans. Second, while the banshee warns of death, the Dullahan actively brings it. The banshee's cry gives you time, however brief, to prepare. The Dullahan speaks your name and you die instantly. Third, the banshee is associated with specific families, particularly old Irish families with surnames beginning with O or Mac. The banshee attaches herself to these lineages, following them through the generations, mourning for each member as they pass. The Dullahan, in contrast, is not bound to particular families. He can come for anyone, regardless of lineage or social status. Peasant or lord, newborn or elder, Irish or foreigner, all are equal before the Dark Horseman. Despite these differences, the two entities are not unrelated. In fact, several accounts describe them working in concert, with the banshee serving as an advance scout or announcer for the Dullahan's arrival. W.B. Yeats, in his 1888 collection Fairy and Folk Tales of the Irish Peasantry, explicitly connects the two. An omen that sometimes accompanies the banshee is the coachebower, an immense black coach, mounted by a coffin, and drawn by headless horses driven by a Dullahan. In this formulation, the sequence of events becomes clear. First, the banshee appears, wailing and keening. Her cry alerts the family that death is approaching. Then, if the death is particularly significant or occurs under certain circumstances, the Cóiste Bodhar arrives, driven by the Dullahan, to physically collect the departing soul. The banshee is the warning, the Dullahan is the collection. This partnership creates a complete mythology around death. You are warned by the banshee's cry, giving you time to make peace with God, to say goodbyes, to prepare your soul for judgment. Then the Dullahan arrives at the appointed hour to transport you to whatever comes next. The system is both terrible and, in a strange way, merciful, providing both forewarning and finality. There are accounts of people hearing the banshee's wail and then, later that same night, hearing the rumble of the death coach passing by or seeing the Dullahan riding through the darkness. In these instances, both entities are present, each fulfilling their respective roles in death's ritual. The banshee might even fly alongside the coach, her keening mingling with the thunder of hooves and wheels, creating a symphony of doom that announces death's arrival to all who hear it. Yet the two can also operate independently. The banshee might cry without the Dullahan ever appearing, simply performing her role as warner without need for the physical collection of the soul. Similarly, the Dullahan can ride without any banshee accompaniment, particularly in cases where the death is sudden or where no ancestral connection to a banshee exists. The different emotional registers of these two entities are worth noting. The banshee, for all her association with death, is not malevolent. She mourns. Her wailing is genuine grief for the person who is about to die. She has followed this family for generations, has watched these people grow and live and love, and now she must grieve their passing. There is something almost tender in the banshee's role, a recognition that death is sad, that it represents loss. The Dullahan, in contrast, is cold. He does not mourn. He does not grieve. He simply collects. If there is any emotion in him at all, it is a grim satisfaction in carrying out his duty. He is death as inevitability rather than death as tragedy. He represents the impersonal, unstoppable nature of mortality, while the banshee represents its emotional impact. From a psychological and cultural perspective, having two different death omens serves important functions. The banshee addresses the need for preparation, both practical and spiritual. When death is coming, people need time to settle affairs, to confess sins, to say what needs to be said. The warning gives them this opportunity. The Dullahan addresses the need for finality. Death cannot be bargained with or postponed indefinitely. When your time comes, you must go. The Dullahan's call is absolute and cannot be refused. Together, they also create a framework for processing unexpected death. If someone died suddenly with no warning, people might say there was no banshee, suggesting that the death was unnatural or premature, not part of the proper order of things. But if the banshee had been heard beforehand, then the death, however tragic, was at least properly foretold. It was meant to be. This belief could provide some comfort, a sense that even in death, there was order and structure rather than pure chaos. The relationship between the banshee and Dullahan also reflects different historical layers of Irish belief. The banshee appears in older sources and seems to have deeper roots in Irish tradition. The Dullahan, with less documentation in early sources, might represent a later development or a figure that was less universally known. By connecting them, later folklore created a more complete system, filling in gaps and providing a comprehensive mythology of death's approach. In artistic and literary representations, the two are often paired. Halloween decorations in Ireland might feature both the Wailing Woman and the Headless Rider. Stories told on dark winter nights might include both entities, with the banshee's cry serving as the prelude to the Dullahan's arrival. They have become, in the popular imagination, a matched pair, two sides of the same dark coin. For the people of historical Ireland, living in a time when death was far more present than it is in the modern world, when illness could kill in days and accidents were common and violent, having these two figures must have provided a way to conceptualize and cope with the constant threat of mortality. Death was not random but announced by the banshee. Death was not negotiable but claimed by the Dullahan. Between warning and collection, between morning and ending, the Irish found a way to face what all humans must eventually face. From Ireland to the world, the Dullahan's legacy. The Dullahan, despite originating in Irish folklore, did not remain confined to Ireland. The legend spread, evolved, influenced other cultures and was influenced by them in turn. Today, the Headless Horseman is a globally recognized figure, appearing in literature, film, television, and popular culture around the world. Understanding how this Irish legend became a universal symbol requires tracing its journey across cultures and centuries. The most famous non-Irish Headless Horseman is undoubtedly the one from Washington Irving's 1820 short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Irving's Headless Horseman is the ghost of a Hessian soldier who lost his head to a cannonball during the American Revolutionary War. He haunts the area around Sleepy Hollow, New York, riding out at night in search of his lost head, and he is particularly active around Halloween. The question of whether Irving was directly influenced by Irish folklore has been debated extensively. Irving was of Scottish and English ancestry, both cultures with their own headless ghost traditions. Cornwall, from which Irving's father emigrated, had its own headless coachman legend. The timing is also significant. Irving published The Legend of Sleepy Hollow in 1820, while Thomas Crofton Croker's detailed documentation of the Dullahan was not published until 1825. This suggests Irving could not have been directly influenced by Croker's specific accounts. However, oral traditions existed before written documentation, and the basic concept of a headless horseman as a death omen was present in various forms across Celtic and Germanic cultures. It is entirely possible that Irving drew on a broader tradition of headless ghost stories rather than the specific Irish Dullahan. Alternatively, he might have independently created a similar figure, as the image of a headless horseman is archetypal enough that multiple cultures might develop it separately. Regardless of the direct connections or lack thereof, the legend of Sleepy Hollow ensured that the headless horseman would become a staple of American folklore and Halloween tradition. Irving's story was adapted into plays, films, television shows, and countless other media. The image of the headless rider throwing his severed head at the terrified schoolmaster Ichabod Crane became iconic, firmly embedding the figure in popular culture. But the headless horseman tradition is not limited to Ireland and America. Similar figures appear in various European countries, suggesting either cultural cross-pollination or independent development of similar folklore. In Germany, there are several headless rider legends, including the wild huntsman who rides through the night sky. The Brothers Grimm collected various tales featuring headless ghosts and spirits in their folklore compilations. Scotland has the Dullahan, a name linguistically similar to one of the Irish variants of Dullahan, suggesting possible shared Celtic roots. Wales has the Fenyu Pen, the headless woman, who rides a headless horse. Cornwall, as mentioned, has its own headless coachman. Throughout Northern Europe, from Scandinavia to the Netherlands, variations of headless ghost stories appear in local folklore. In Norse mythology and later Scandinavian folklore, there are tales of headless ghosts created when someone is beheaded and their head is separated from the body to prevent the ghost from being powerful. W.B. Yeats noted this connection in his folklore collection, suggesting that such practices might have contributed to the development of headless ghost legends, including possibly the Dullahan. The Dullahan's influence extends into modern popular culture beyond Halloween traditions. In anime and manga, the figure has been adapted multiple times. Perhaps most famously, the character Kelty Sturluson in the light novel and anime series Jirarara is a female Dullahan who has come to Japan searching for her stolen head. She rides a motorcycle that can transform into a headless horse, blending traditional folklore with modern urban fantasy. In video games, Dullahan-type enemies appear frequently, from the Final Fantasy series to Castlevania to Dark Souls. These games typically portray Dullahans as formidable enemies, often minibosses or special encounters, wielding supernatural weapons and possessing powerful abilities. The Dullahan has become a stock monster type, as recognizable to gamers as dragons or zombies. In fantasy literature, various authors have incorporated Dullahans or Dullahan-inspired creatures into their world building. The figure serves as a versatile antagonist or mysterious entity, bringing with it all the associations of death and inevitability that make it effective in storytelling. The core image, a headless rider carrying his own head, is visually striking enough to be memorable while being flexible enough to be adapted to various settings. Irish tourism and cultural organizations have embraced the Dullahan as part of their heritage. Ghost tours in Ireland often include Dullahan stories. Museums display information about the legend alongside other elements of Irish folklore. The figure has become a symbol of Irish mythology's darker side, balancing out the more cheerful images of leprechauns and shamrocks. The Dullahan has also influenced modern pagan and neo-pagan practices. People who follow Celtic Reconstructionist paths or Irish-focused pagan traditions sometimes incorporate acknowledgement of the Dullahan into their Samhain observances, recognizing him as a symbol of death and the thinning of the veil between worlds during that liminal time. In academic circles, the Dullahan serves as a case study in how folklore evolves, spreads, and adapts to new contexts. Folklorists and anthropologists study the variations in the legend across different regions and time periods, using it to understand broader patterns in how myths and legends function in human culture. The questions surrounding the Dullahan's origins: how old is he really? Was he originally Irish, or did he develop from a pan-Celtic tradition? How much has the legend changed over time? Continue to generate scholarly debate. The enduring appeal of the Dullahan and similar Headless Horseman figures likely stems from several factors. First, the image itself is viscerally disturbing. A headless body violates our fundamental expectations about what a body should be. Adding motion to this violation, making the headless body ride and move with purpose, creates cognitive dissonance that registers as horror. Second, the Dullahan represents death in a more immediate and concrete way than many other death symbols. The Grim Reaper is an abstract skeleton in robes. The Dullahan is specific: a rider, a horse, a whip, a name being called. This specificity makes the threat feel more real, more possible. Third, the Dullahan legend contains elements that are both universal and culturally specific. The universal elements: fear of death, the idea of omens, the possibility of supernatural protection, allow it to resonate across cultures. The specific Irish elements, the connection to ancient gods, the role in a particular cultural and historical context, give it depth and authenticity that make it more than just a generic monster. Finally, the Dullahan embodies a fundamental truth that all cultures must grapple with: death comes for everyone, and when it comes, there is no escaping it. This message, delivered through the striking imagery of the headless rider calling names in the darkness, has proven timeless and transcendent. Whether told around an Irish hearth in the 19th century or watched on a screen in the 21st, the Dullahan's story speaks to deep human fears and concerns that have not changed despite all our technological advancement and cultural evolution. The Dullahan has travelled far from the lonely roads of Ireland where he first rode. He has crossed oceans and centuries, has been adapted and reimagined countless times, has become part of a global cultural vocabulary. Yet at his core, he remains what he always was: a figure of darkness and death, riding through the night, calling names that must be answered. His journey from local Irish folklore to international icon demonstrates the power of truly resonant mythology to transcend its origins and speak to fundamental human experiences. Living with the legend, protection and preparation. For those who believed in the Dullahan, and belief in Ireland was widespread well into the 20th century, the question was not whether he existed but how to protect yourself when he was abroad. A comprehensive system of protections, warnings, and behaviors developed over generations, passed down from parents to children, shared among neighbors, refined through experience and near misses. These practices offer insight into how people coped with the constant presence of death in their lives and the supernatural beliefs that helped them process that presence. The most fundamental protection, as we have discussed, was gold. Carrying a gold coin, wearing a gold ring or other jewelry, keeping a gold-headed pin in your clothing. Any of these could potentially save you if you encountered the Dullahan. This was not mere superstition to be laughed at, but practical safety measure, as important as carrying a lantern when traveling at night. Gold objects became talismans, passed down through families, given as gifts with instructions about their true purpose. But gold was not always available, particularly to poorer families who had little wealth to spare. For those without gold, other protections were recommended. Staying indoors was the most reliable defense. The Dullahan primarily rode outdoors, along roads and through fields. If you remained in your home with the doors bolted and windows shuttered, you were reasonably safe, unless of course you were the one whose name he had come to call. This leads to another crucial practice. Never, ever look out your window if you hear hoofbeats at night. Curiosity could literally kill you. If you heard the thunder of approaching hooves, the rumble of wheels, or any other sound that might indicate the Dullahan's presence, you were to immediately move away from windows, close any curtains or shutters that were open, and hide deeper in the house. Looking at the Dullahan could result in being blinded by his whip or marked for death by his blood. The safest course was complete avoidance. Similarly, if you had to be out at night and you encountered the Dullahan, you were not to make eye contact or stare at him. Avert your eyes immediately. Look at the ground, at the sky, anywhere but at that terrible figure. Seeing him peripherally was already dangerous enough. Directly gazing at him was tantamount to inviting attack. Certain times of year required extra vigilance. The Dullahan was most active during Irish feast days and festivals, particularly around Samhain, Halloween, when the veil between worlds was thinnest, and around late July or early August, the time associated with Crom Dubh Sunday and the harvest festival of Lunasad. During these periods, people who could avoid night travel would do so. Essential journeys were postponed. Visits to distant relatives could wait until after the dangerous period passed. If travel during dangerous times was absolutely necessary, precautions were multiplied. You would travel in groups when possible, as the Dullahan seemed to prefer solitary targets. You would carry multiple protective items, gold if you had it, religious medals, perhaps a bit of rowan wood or iron. You would leave early enough to reach your destination before full darkness fell. You would choose routes that passed by churches or holy wells when possible, places where the sacred might offer some protection against the profane. Gates played a special role in Dullahan protection, as demonstrated by the account of the McNamara servant. If you heard the death coach approaching and there were gates between you and it, you should immediately open those gates as wide as possible. This seems counterintuitive. Why make it easier for death to reach you? But the logic was sound. The Cóiste Bodhar would burst through locked gates regardless, and when it had to stop to do so, it might notice you. But if the gates were already open, the coach would roll straight through without stopping, and you might escape its attention entirely. Churches and churchyards held complex positions in the protection system. On one hand, holy ground should theoretically offer protection against evil entities. On the other hand, the Dullahan was often said to emerge from graveyards, and the death coach was frequently seen traveling from cemeteries to the homes of the dying. This suggests that churches and graveyards were not safe havens but rather the Dullahan's domain, the territory from which he operated. The advice, therefore, was to avoid passing near graveyards at night when possible. Holy water, blessed medals, and other religious items were carried for general protection, though their effectiveness specifically against the Dullahan was unclear. These items might help against evil spirits generally, but the Dullahan seemed to occupy a category of his own, not quite demon, not quite ghost, not quite fairy. He was death itself, and death does not respect religious boundaries. Still, carrying these items provided psychological comfort if nothing else, a sense of having done all you could to protect yourself. Some families had specific prayers or invocations they would say if they believed the Dullahan was near. These varied regionally and by family, but commonly included appeals to St. Patrick, who had defeated Crom Dubh, or to the Archangel Michael, the defeater of demons. The prayers were said urgently, repeatedly, until the danger seemed to have passed. In households where a member was gravely ill or dying, special precautions were taken. Candles would be kept burning throughout the night, both to provide light for the departing soul and to help ward off evil influences. The doors would be locked but could not be barred, because when death came, whether naturally or by the Dullahan's call, the soul must be able to leave. Family members would keep vigil, sitting with the dying person, ensuring they were not alone, and watching for any signs of supernatural presence. If someone in the area had recently died, people would be especially vigilant for several nights afterward. The Dullahan might be collecting multiple souls in a short period. The death coach might make several passes through a region. So each death brought a renewed wariness, a heightened alertness to strange sounds and shadows in the night. Communities developed informal warning systems. If someone heard or saw the Dullahan, they would spread word quickly the next day. The dark man was riding last night, they might say, or simply, be careful on the roads. This information would be passed along, ensuring that everyone in the area knew to take extra precautions until the danger seemed to have passed. Children were taught these protections from a young age. Parents would tell them stories of the Dullahan, not just for entertainment, but as genuine warnings and instruction. Never look out the window if you hear hooves at night. Always carry something gold if you can. If you see him, don't stare, and don't call out. These lessons were as important as learning to watch for snakes in the grass or to test the ice before walking on a frozen pond. The elderly, having lived longer and thus having more experience with these matters, were often consulted for advice about the Dullahan and how to protect against him. They might know additional precautions, might remember stories of successful defenses, might have acquired wisdom about reading the signs of when the dark man was riding. Their knowledge was valued and respected. Interestingly, while many protections existed, there was universal acknowledgement that nothing could save you if the Dullahan had come specifically for you. If your name was on his lips, if death had truly called you, then no amount of gold, prayer, or precaution would help. This acceptance of ultimate mortality, combined with practical measures to avoid unnecessary risks, created a balanced approach to the threat. Do what you can, but understand that in the end, some things cannot be avoided. This philosophy reflects a broader Irish attitude toward death, a mix of practical acceptance, spiritual faith, and a belief that while you cannot escape death entirely, you can influence when and how it comes. The Dullahan protections were part of a larger framework for dealing with mortality, alongside prayers for the dead, wake traditions, funeral customs, and beliefs about the afterlife. Even as Ireland modernized, as electricity brought light to dark roads and automobiles made travel faster and safer, some of these practices persisted. People might laugh at them, call them superstition, mock the old ways. But even the mockers might keep a gold coin in their pocket, just in case. Even the skeptics might avoid looking out windows at night if they heard something unusual. Because deep down, in the part of the mind that remembers being young and being told these stories by elders who absolutely believed, the question remains, what if? Conclusion: the Dark Rider endures. We have journeyed together through the darkness of Irish folklore, following the hoofbeats of the Dullahan from his possible origins in ancient god worship to his modern incarnation in global popular culture. We have examined every aspect of this terrifying figure, his name that speaks of darkness, his grotesque appearance, his death coach and its terrible purpose, his powers that make him unstoppable, the mysterious protection of gold, the accounts of those who claim to encounter him, his relationship with the banshee, his influence on worldwide folklore, and the practices by which people sought to protect themselves from his attention. What emerges from this comprehensive exploration is a figure of remarkable power and endurance. The Dullahan is not simply a scary story told to frighten children on dark nights, though he certainly serves that purpose. He is a complex mythological entity that speaks to deep human concerns about death, fate, and the unknown. He represents the inevitable end that awaits all of us, the calling of our name that we must eventually answer, the final journey we must take alone. The Dullahan embodies death in a way that is both universal and distinctly Irish. Universal in that all cultures must grapple with mortality, must find ways to conceptualize and cope with the terror of ending. Distinctly Irish in the specific details, the possible connection to Crom Dubh and ancient pre-Christian worship, whether historically accurate or later invention, the emphasis on decapitation, the folklore about gold protection, the linkage to specific Irish locations and festivals, the integration with other Irish supernatural entities like the banshee. What makes the Dullahan so enduringly powerful is that he is not abstract. He is not a skeleton in robes or a beautiful angel or a faceless void. He is concrete and specific, a headless rider on a black horse, carrying a spine whip, driving a coach made of bones, calling your name with lips that stretch in a horrific grin. This specificity makes him real in a way that abstract concepts of death cannot be. You can picture him. You can imagine the sound of his approach. You can hear your name being called in that terrible voice. The legend also taps into primal fears beyond just death itself. The fear of decapitation, of the body being severed and destroyed. The fear of the darkness and what might be moving through it. The fear of being pursued by something unstoppable. The fear of hearing your name called by something that has no right to know it. All of these visceral terrors are wrapped up in the Dullahan, making him a figure of nightmare that has haunted Irish imagination for generations. Yet there is also something strangely comforting about the Dullahan legend. In a world where death can seem random and meaningless, where people die in accidents, from disease, from violence that makes no sense, the Dullahan provides structure. He represents death as having purpose and agency. Death is not chaos but a rider with a mission. When he comes for you, it is because your time has arrived, because you have been chosen, because there is a reason, even if that reason is beyond human understanding. The protections against the Dullahan, particularly the gold, also provide comfort by giving people agency. You are not helpless before death. You can take precautions. You can prepare. You might not be able to escape forever, but you can perhaps postpone, can buy time, can protect yourself in circumstances where protection is possible. This sense of agency, however illusory, helps people cope with the fear of mortality. As we conclude our exploration, the Dullahan continues to ride. He rides through Irish folklore, through the stories still told in pubs and homes, through the warnings given to children who might stay out too late. He rides through global popular culture, appearing in books and films and games, adapting to new contexts while maintaining his essential nature. He rides through the collective human imagination, embodying our fear of death and our fascination with the supernatural. The next time you find yourself on a dark road, whether in Ireland or anywhere else in the world, and you hear hoofbeats approaching from behind, you might remember the Dullahan. You might feel a chill run down your spine. You might walk a little faster, reach for any gold you might be carrying, pray that the rider passes you by. And even if you tell yourself it is just your imagination, just a regular horse and a regular rider, just the wind in the trees, a small part of you will wonder, will listen for the rumble of wheels, will strain to hear if a name is being called, will remember that some legends endure because they touch something true, something that resonates across centuries and cultures, something that speaks to the deepest human fears and mysteries. The Dullahan rides tonight. He has always ridden and will always ride, as long as people die and stories are told. He is the dark man on the dark horse riding the dark roads, and his name is Death. Thank you for joining me on this journey into Ireland's darkest folklore. If you found this exploration fascinating and want to hear more stories from Irish mythology and Celtic tradition, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you never miss a new tale. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts about the Dullahan or any encounters with Irish folklore in your own life. And as always, stay safe, Keep a little gold close, and remember, not all hoofbeats in the night are as innocent as they seem. Until next time, dear wanderers, keep the old stories alive.